it's going to be an interesting journey because I'm finding my voice.
Way too deep to be dealing with bullshit. Closing out chapter 1 of The Other N-Word, and this is episode 4. The first 3 episodes sort of followed, my story, and so the chapter 1 is called In the Beginning, All for a Purpose, and this is section 3, the last section, which is much given, much expected. I remember my mom once saying that it worried her that we would win everything we entered because we would not know how to cope if we ever lost. This was an important lesson for me because my first encounter with failure was pretty jolting and changed the course of my life in many ways. In 5th grade, I wrote an essay based on the prompt, In Pursuit of Excellence. Based on winning the written and oratorical awards at my school, I was entered into a regional competition. This was my first encounter with kids from a completely different place, circumstance, and point of view. I sat and listened to the other kids give their speeches, and I grew more nervous the longer I waited. What was worse was that after winning for several years straight, this was the first time anyone in my family had ever come to one of my competitions. I got up to the podium and I drew a complete blank. You know that you're nervous, but you fully expect to have it together once it's time for you to go on. I was completely out of it. I couldn't remember my speech at all. I had let my anxiety take over the whole situation. I have never been that humiliated in my life, and it embedded in me a fear of that kind of moment occurring every time I had to speak. Mind you, I spent the next 20 years pursuing and becoming a lawyer, so you can imagine how this incident became magnified in my mind over time. Though there were a few shining moments later in life, that speech marked the end of my public speaking days. To the extent that I pursued opportunities that would require me to stand on my feet and make some type of delivery, I leaned toward those that involved off-the-cuff responses versus strict memorization, informality versus formality, group or team presentations versus individual. My mom had high expectations for us in terms of education. Yet, I do not remember her ever helping with homework, talking to teachers, coming to the school, or participating in any other activity that we typically associate with mothers who care about their child's education. She checked report cards to make sure they were filled with A's and not too many B's, and that was about it. Yet our home was filled with books, including the standard and kids version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. We lived just a block and a half from the library, and we were in every program you can think of. My mom could not tell you the name of any college, but with the exception of Roderick, we all went to great schools. Me, Berkeley, Nita, Wanda, and LaDonna, UC Davis, and Larita, San Diego State, and UCLA. Without knowing it, she instilled in us a sense of personal responsibility for our success. Lucky for me, I had Roderick, Nita, and Wanda to model my achievements after, my cousins, aunts, and uncles to celebrate my intelligence, the nerd, and my friends from school to protect me from any negative peer pressure. The two things that stood out the most about the living room at 408 was the number of pictures on the wall and the number of trophies on the shelves. At the time, I thought everyone had plastic on their couches and broken television sets that acted as stands for smaller working ones, so that did not stand out for me. In a household filled with high achievers, it is much easier to embrace your own achievements. Where I come from, having a big brother or a big sister was a big thing. It added a layer of protection amongst your peers and opened your world to experiences you would be excluded from other older kids. I did not need television or the tall tales from my friends to shape my definition of cool. In elementary, I had two sisters who went to Washington Prep High School, were part of the popular crowd, dated football players, and took us to games, traveled the country giving speeches and representing their schools in various conferences. Nita was a natural entrepreneur, acting as both the candy lady and a babysitter for neighborhood kids. And Wanda was a superstar amongst her peers, always dressed in the latest fashion and attracting sadiddy friends from outside the neighborhood. Roderick was graduating from Jefferson High School, where he was a star basketball player, played in the band, and had the largest baseball hat collection of all the guys in the neighborhood. He had street credibility without being in a gang, and he worked for the LA Clippers, so we always had tickets to the Lakers games. Shade. Though the achievements of my first cousins were not necessarily connected to school, their encouragement of my nerdiness and the general reputation of those Nickersons for having the gift of gab with the muscles to back it up provided me the freedom to hone my talents. The actual freedom I enjoyed in the projects was definitely a result of being part of such a huge and infamous family. Nobody really messed with us. In fact, in the projects, I saw my little 120-pound Aunt Nona bobble with her 250-pound Samoan boyfriend. My cousins Shalonda and Krita whooped girls' asses in the middle of the street, and I've heard tell of full-out family versus family brawls where we came out on top. And this is just the women. Sure, this had a lot to do with the types of friends I ended up attracting when I moved out of the projects. For whatever reason, the kids at 97th Street School who aligned themselves with me tended to be the tough kids or the bullies. It may have been the fact that shit talking was part of my birthright, or maybe they thought by befriending me they could copy my homework. But all I know is that they added to my cool points and dared anyone to make fun of me for being a schoolgirl. In our grade level, Rosetta and Tashana were the two queens of the schoolyard, mortal enemies, and of course, two of my best friends. That definitely made for some interesting interactions. My main friend in 5th grade was Jaime Hernandez, and he was one of the very few at the time, it was LA in the 90s, non-black kids at the school. I remember most of the Mexican students being in ESL classes and therefore segregated from the general school population, but not Jaime. He had swagger like a black kid, but he came from a whole different background. I think we connected on this level since we were both inhabiting and expected to survive in worlds that were diametrically opposed to the world that existed inside our household. Jaime was super cool, but he was a bit of a bully. In fact, the first and only physical fight I have ever had was with this guy from my classroom who Jaime wanted to fight for seemingly no reason. I remember co-signing and instigating as Jaime pushed the guy around in an attempt to get him to engage in a fight. The boy refused to take Jaime on and just kept trying to walk away. Well, I said something that really ticked him off. I know what I said. So to save some face, he decided to fight me. Of course, I ended up having a major crush on that same boy a few weeks later when Quincy Jones introduced Tevin Campbell to the world, and he happened to look just like him. I remember feeling bad for him because everyone at the school wanted to beat him up for coming at me. Though the next leg of my journey necessitated much less of the protection my family and friends provided, The self-confidence and sense of belonging would prove paramount to my continued success. I don't know how it happened, though I suspect it had something to do with Mr. Willis and Mr. Savage. I was enrolled in the honors program at Gaspar de Portola Middle School, a highly gifted and talented magnet school in the San Fernando Valley. Though I had no clue before the first day of school, I was about to enter into a world that looked completely different than the one in which I inhabited for the first 10 years of my life. The intimidation I felt that day when I was forced to compete with students outside of my neighborhood and neighborhoods like mine would soon subside as I was singled out for a spot in this highly prestigious program. Again, I was subject to a jolting experience, and this time I had no one to share the experience with, as my siblings, both younger and older, all attended neighborhood schools for their primary and secondary educations. And with that, that ends my chapter 1